Welcome back to videos. Missed them, but they're always good to come back to. Today we are going to go over integers and a coordinate plane. Most of this should be review, but we need to learn some of the technical terms. So we're going to learn a definition of what an integer is, what a whole number is, and really what a coordinate plane is. What do we mean by that? So our title for the notes is integers and coordinate plane. Please put your date. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to define what an integer is. And go ahead and underline it. So an integer is a whole number, and what we mean by a whole number is we mean 3 or 12 or 102. It's not a fraction, it doesn't have a decimal, it's not point anything, it's something we can hold in our hand. I can hold a whole apple in my hand. So it's a whole number that can be positive or negative, and it includes 0. So integers are -2, -3, 0, 112, -1,250. That's what an integer is. And we like them because, again, they're not these really funky numbers that are decimals and go on forever or funky fractions. So, for example, what are our integers? As I said, -4 is an integer. 102 is an integer. -3,412 is an integer. They're all whole numbers that are both positive or negative. And also remember, last but not least, 0 is classified as an integer. What is not an integer? 1/2 is not an integer. 0.03 is not an integer. Let's do -1 3/4. Not an integer. They are called rational numbers because they are numbers. We allow them, we work with them, they exist. They're just technically not integers. So we have integers, then not integers, which again, all of these are rational numbers, and we'll go over what an irrational number is later on. Not in this section though, just later on in the month. Okay, so I'm going to erase, hit pause if you need to write it down, because now that we know what an integer is, we need to understand how do we use it in math. And we use it in math by putting it on a number line. So I'm going to erase. And we're going to draw our number line. So in number line, we always include 0, and then we want to put integers that continue. We have to have an arrow, meaning that this line is going to continue, because numbers continue forever. They actually continue to what we refer to as positive infinity, meaning they go on forever. And then we're going to put our negative integers, our negative whole numbers, on our number line. Have to put the arrow, because again, it goes on forever, and it goes on to what we refer to as negative infinity. So here are integers. And sometimes you kind of have to get asked, well, which one is less, which one is more? Well, you just look at the number line. We know that 2 is greater than -2 because it's to the right. So when we talk about doing greater than or less than, the number to the right, I should say to the farthest right, so the number to the farthest right on the number line is always the greatest. So how do you prove that 12 is greater than 11? We just put it on the number line. How do you prove that -2 is greater than -5? Because it says so on the number line. It is furthest to the right. We also use the number line to do absolute value. So I'm going to erase. we're still technically under integers. And let's do the definition of absolute value. Absolute value. Okay, an absolute value, it's a distance. That's the most important thing that you remember. Absolute value means distance. It is a distance from a number to 0 on the number line. So, for example, and this is what we use as our absolute value notation. We want to know the absolute value of 4. And we do these long bars. That denotes absolute value. Well, we go up to our number line. And we go, well, to get from 4 to 0, I skip over 1, 2, 3, 4. So the absolute value of 4 is 4, because that's the distance. What about the absolute value of -2? It's a horrible 2, I apologize. Well, let's go on the number line here. Here's -2. How many times do I have to move to get to 0? 1, 2. So the absolute value of -2 is 2. Let's do one more. What's the absolute value of -4? So big bars. We'll do this one in green. Well, -4 is over here. To get to 0, because it's the distance from the number to 0, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So hopefully you're noticing a pattern that an absolute value must always be positive. And it's always positive because the distance is always positive. So an absolute value is the distance from a number to 0 on the number line. It is always positive. And again, it's positive not because it's an absolute value, it's because absolute value is distance, and distance is always positive. All right, let me know if you have any questions on that. We're going to just do a quick review of a couple sign issues before we move on to the coordinate plane. So number 3 under our section of integers is signs. So I just want to remind you that when you multiply, a positive integer times a positive integer, you get a positive result, which is what we refer to as our product. And then when you multiply a negative integer by a negative integer, you also get a positive product. And then when you multiply a positive times a negative, you get a negative. And remember, order does not matter in multiplication. So whether it's positive times a negative or negative times a positive, you're still going to get a negative number. So remember that. Also remember that when you are adding and subtracting integers, actually, let's just do some bullet points here, or some funky arrows, whatever you so choose. Remember that when you subtract a negative, what happens? The subtraction of a negative, it becomes positive. So when you subtract a negative, because a negative times a negative is positive, that's why that happens. It's because you actually have multiplication occurring. So the subtraction of a negative results in really 3 plus 2, which is 5. Is that right? I hope so. Okay, I am moving on to the coordinate plane. Circle if you have any questions. So, Roman numeral number 2. So we love coordinate planes. They're really, really useful. They prove a lot of things. So a coordinate plane is a two-dimensional plane. And we'll discuss what a plane is in geometry a bit more, but just take my word for it, it's a two-dimensional plane with an x and y axis. So here's your coordinate plane. Here are the rules. You must have at least 2 arrows showing that the lines continue forever. For good habits, we're always going to do 4, because again, we need to show that the lines continue forever. Our vertical line, our vertical axis is our y-axis, and we're going to label that. Our horizontal line is our x-axis. So we must have 2 lines, 4 arrows, and label with x and y. I always remember y high, so that's how I know where it goes. This center point here is referred to as our origin. And then we have, in using integers, we have numbers associated. So this is +1, +2, +3, +4, +5, all the way to +infinity. And up for my y's, I have +1, +2, +3, +4. Again, all the way up to +infinity. Over here, though, when we go to the left, just like on the number line that I drew previously, anytime you go to the left, it is negative. So we have -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. Again, now going to -infinity. And when we go down, we also have negative numbers. So this is -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, all the way down to -infinity. Now we plot points on our coordinate plane in the form of an x and y point, where you always do your x first and then your y. So for example, and this is all we're going to do, we are going to plot A, which is -1, 3. We're going to plot B, which is 4, -2. We're going to plot C, which is 0, 5. And we're going to plot D, which is -2, 0. We want to label what our x and y are. I always do that because I like to flip them. So make sure you label your x and y, and then let's plot. So A is -1, +3. So I go to -1 on my x-axis, which is here, and then I go to 3 on my y-axis. So this is point A. B is 4, -2, so 4 along the x always first, down to -2. This is B. C is 0, 5, so where does x equal 0? Well, right here. This is a big fat 0 for both of them. So x equals 0 here, so I'm not going to move, but I'm going to go up to where y equals 5, and that gives me C. And then I'm going to do -2, 0. So go to where x equals -2. Again, 0 here, I'm not moving, so that gives me D. That is all you need to know, sir. So write down if you have any questions, and I will see you on Monday. Night.